Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Angela. Hi, everybody. Like Angela said, I am Samantha Peasley. Today, we're talking about familiarizing yourself with the nearest exit as if you were on an airplane, how to prepare early so that when you're ready to leave your business, you're not scrambling at the last minute or getting into choices. So you guys might see that there's a lot of slides in today's session. That is not because we're going to go through each and every one of them, but the final portion are basically checklists for you. So after the presentation, in the next couple of days, Angela is going to send out this presentation to any of the attendees. And so those final slides will act as checklists for you. So I don't want everyone to freak out that this is going to be just nothing but looking at slides full of text. But as Angela said, my name is Samantha Peasley. I'm an attorney with Polaris Law Group in North Glen, Colorado. We are a small firm. We serve as general counsel for small to medium-sized businesses. And within that, I specialize in intellectual property, international transactions, and data privacy. But we have other attorneys in our firm as well. We're in North Glen, but we go all over the place, especially with the international side. As far as this presentation goes, I've helped at least 24 businesses transfer their business in some way, shape, or form. And we're going to talk about what different kinds of transfers are. And then almost 100 try to think about these processes ahead of time, whether that's doing some emergency planning or talking about down the road planning. So this is something that I do regularly. Now, I will do a disclaimer here that this is an educational presentation. Nothing in here constitutes legal advice. Legal advice should be made on the basis of your individual situation. Now, as Angela said, we're doing this through the SBDC. So if you have personalized questions as a result of this presentation, I encourage you to sign up for a consult with me through the SBDC, and we can talk about that. I will take questions as we go along. You're welcome to put them in the chat. I will also do questions kind of at natural points at the ends of sections before we jump into the next section. I give a warning that if your question is overly personalized, I will very politely say that sounds like a fantastic thing to talk about in a consult. Why don't we do that? However, if yours can be applied to a larger portion of the group, more applicable to types of businesses, types of industries, what does this mean? How about this? I will answer it in here. If you're not sure, just go ahead and ask it. The worst thing that I'll tell you is we should have an individual consult on that. That doesn't really apply to the whole group. So that's doing that more for, so this is not legal advice, as well as so that this is useful to everyone who is on here. Now that that's out of the way, what are we going to talk about here today? So our agenda for today is first, we're going to talk about the types of exit options there are at a high level briefly, kind of what those might mean. Some of you will be thinking of this at different stages, and I will ask in a little bit. Well, actually, I'll go ahead and ask that now. If everyone can put in the chat, or everybody who feels like sharing, who you are and why you're here. Are you thinking about exiting or selling now? Are you looking at this for 20 years down the road? Did you just get a great offer from your uncle who wants to sell you his business? Just a short, brief explanation, and that can kind of tell me who's in our room, what we're talking about in here as we'll talk about those types of exit options. Then we're going to talk about pre-planning, the stuff that everyone can do regardless of what stage of the business that they're in, and that ideally is done well in advance of when you're actually looking at exiting. We'll also talk about a little bit of housekeeping, ongoing things to do with your business to make your actual exit easier. Then section 4 is when we're going to have those checklists. So we'll talk about what 5 of those key actual exits look like, and I'll highlight some terms that need to be known for each of them, but I won't walk everyone through every line of every actual checklist. And then we'll have some final questions at the end. But like I said, we'll also take some questions at the interim of each of those. So great. Looks like we've got some looking to sell, have a potential buyer. Awesome. So if you are looking to sell imminently, some of the pre-planning housekeeping stuff, don't freak out that you haven't already done it. You're just going to be on a little bit more of an expedited path. And we will talk about that because it looks like that's where a bunch of you are. Some of you, it looks like you're more in you want to do it kind of sooner rather than later, but it's not known or imminent. Some are looking more at the long-term plan. I see we have one of our consultants in here, Miss Karen Patel. So she is another excellent one where if you guys are looking at selling, I highly recommend talking to Karen through an SBDC consult, or otherwise your financial planners we're going to talk about are a part of that big team. So keep them coming, just keeping an eye on who we've got in today so I can kind of tailor what we're talking about a little bit more. So first, we want to know what our options are for how to exit. People are sometimes surprised that they have options. Well, it's either I close it or I sell it, right? Well, no, there's a lot of variation in between that. However, most of us do, in fact, imagine exiting as selling the business for tons and tons of cash because this thing is so valuable and I have put so much time and money into it. But how much we actually get for the business and whether it realizes that value can be impacted by how good we are at taking these steps ahead of time. And unfortunately, when people don't do this pre-planning, many of them actually exit just by having to shut down shop, which is unfortunate. And well, it's unfortunate if that's not the way you intend it. For some people, that is a best choice. There is nothing wrong with that if that's a best choice. But we hate for you to be thinking that you're going to do this and instead be here. So that's our goal today, is to make sure that you're choosing the option that's right for you. So some of the ways to exit, I put at the top fading. I put fading there because that's what we see the most often when people haven't planned for an exit, is they just slowly start winding down their business until they're doing less or less. And then we find that we've essentially closed. We use up all of the assets. We clear out all of the clients. We stop taking in new business. We just sort of fade down. The next one is more of an affirmative closing or liquidating. That's that putting that closed sign out front. But that's when we still have all of the tables and chairs and all of the clients. And what do we do with those? We liquidate them. We sell them off. We affirmatively close the company at that point. Then we also have the possibility of retiring from the work, but maintaining ownership. And I have the retiring in quotation marks there because some of us are better at actually stopping the work than others when we are still maintaining ownership. And I think a couple of you may have an idea of what I'm talking about there, of when you retire, but you're actually having trouble letting go. But sometimes it's truly retiring. You're no longer working in the company, but you maintain that ownership. You continue to get profit interest. You continue to keep your name on the sign so that somebody else can continue doing the work. Then there's an internal transfer. These are especially popular in Colorado these days because there's a lot of monetary incentives for various types of employee transfers. But an internal transfer is you're giving up your interest in the company, but the company stays, and you're giving it to somebody who is already an active participant in the company. So again, most common are employees, sometimes all employees, such as in an employee stock ownership plan, sometimes just one or two employees. So you have that trusted employee that's been with you for 10, 15 years. You want to transfer your interest in the company to them and they take it over. Sometimes other members are shareholders. So for example, here at Polaris, there are 3 of us who are attorneys. So if I wanted to exit in a way where I give or sell my interest to the other members or shareholders, that's an internal transfer. They already know what's going on in the business. Then there are the external close transfers. So you notice I distinguish between external close and external arm's length. The close transfers are going to be the people that you feel a little bit more comfortable loosening some of the restrictions on. They know you, they know your company, they know your industry a little bit better. So common ways that we see this are family. So I kind of made the reference of, if your uncle is wanting to sell you the business, that would be considered a close transfer. It's external. You're not actively part of the business at the moment, but you do know him, you trust him, you have a relationship with him. Known industry professionals. So for example, if I wanted to sell my interest to, let's say myself and all of my partners wanted to leave, and we wanted to transfer our business or the substantial portion of it to another attorney who is not part of our firm, but who we know and trust and who understands our industry. And then I would also call small scale sales close transfers. They tend to need a little bit less paperwork. What do I mean by small scale? In my world, we usually consider that under $100,000. If you're under $100,000, you don't necessarily need all of the protections and paperwork that a larger transfer would. But then there are external arm's length transfers. That's when you're listing your company and a complete stranger is buying it. They don't know you. They don't know how your business has been. They're interested in this, but they need to know a lot more to determine what the value is, whether they're going to go through with this. Requires significantly more diligence, requires significantly more protections for both sides because you don't necessarily know this person or trust this person. IPOs then are the largest one. This is the only time I'm really going to mention them today. These are initial public offerings. This is when you're listing your company, it's going public. You're about to transfer ownership to the general stock markets, so to speak. Typically, we don't deal with that too much with the SBDC, but I did want to mention it as it is a way to exit. And for some companies, it does work really well. Some companies work really hard towards that. So this is our kind of spectrum of how people exit their businesses. And it looks like today we've got a lot of people in that in those transfer sections, and that will be the focus on what we're talking about here. But those are our key ways to exit. Now, what's the best way to exit? So I said this is educational. We're not talking about each of your individual needs. There is no best way to exit that applies to every single business. The ideal way to exit for you considers your wants and needs as an owner. So I'm assuming everybody in here is an owner. And so what I mean by your wants and your needs, how much money do you need to retire on? Do you want to stop working entirely, or do you want to continue on in the industry? Do you want to continue on in a completely separate industry? Do you want to keep tabs on what's going on in the business, be available to help out? Or do you want to say, see ya, and spend the next 3 years in Bali? Those considerations should be taken into account when considering what the best option to exit is. It should also consider the business. Different businesses are going to have better fits. It is much harder to sell a law firm to a third party than it is to sell a manufacturing plant. Why? Because we don't have a lot of physical stuff. We have the clients and the things in our head. Those are valuable assets, but it can be a lot harder to do kind of an external arm's length transfer for that. Additionally, sometimes for certain industries, you can't sell your clients. You can sell their contracts. You can offer to transfer the right to speak to your clients, but at the end of the day, it's your client's choice. And additional businesses sometimes have requirements as to who can actually be an owner. If you are part of a business where there are legal requirements as to who can own it, you might not have all these options available to you. Then it should also consider the transferee. I've definitely talked to businesses who say, well, I would love to just sell this to my office manager when I'm ready to go. I think that they'd be great for it. They've been with me for 15 years. And I say, great. Have you talked to them about it? They say, oh, well, no. Okay, well, do you know what their budget is? Oh, no, I just know what the company is worth. Can't do that. You have to actually talk to the people, consider who that transferee is, what they would want, what they're looking for. And that minimizes surprise. Minimizes surprise to you, to your business, to your clients. Sometimes we are just surprised by this, and that happens. But ideally, we've planned for as much as we can in an exit. So that is the ideal exit, regardless of what your type of business is. So before we go into your actual plan or timeline, does anyone have questions so far about the types of transfers or those considerations? I am not seeing anything. So if you do have a question, you're welcome to pop it into the chat and we'll loop back around at the end of the next section. And so now, all right, let's say we're starting to think about exiting. Now, what we've learned is a bunch of you are past the thinking about it point, but we're going to speed through it. We're going to spend at least a couple of days thinking about it before we actually start exiting. But ideally, you're making a plan or timeline ahead of time, so that you're not surprised, so that you don't have fewer options than you would if you had long-term planning. When do you start planning? Ideally, day one. If you're walking into a plane, you want to know as soon as you walk in, how do you get back out? Are you going to be stuck in here for forever? Ideally, also, if you're doing it on day one, you're already incorporating your plan into your organizational documents, so you don't have contradictions or problems later. Then you also want to start thinking about it as you go. Why? Because if we're in our business for 25 years, the circumstances have changed from day one onward, as well as we want to make sure that we are following processes that will make it easier to transition later. We want to review that plan at least on a 1 to 3 year basis. So we don't need to review that plan every day. But every so often we want to actually affirmatively sit down and say, is this still what I want to do? Do I have the appropriate processes in place so that I can do it when that happens? You also want to do that with major business changes. If you're bringing in a new partner to your business, does that change what you want to do when you exit your business? Does that mean, oh, great, well, then I'll just transfer my interest to them when they go? Does that mean, oh, well, I wanted to sell it when I go, but what if we want to go at 2 different times? Also, with major life changes, we're going to talk about emergency plans in a bit. If you have a child, that might change what you want to do with your business. You might want that business to continue beyond you so that there's some continuing income if something happens to you. You might say, oh, great. I want to be done when my child graduates from college. You might decide to move. Does that mean that you want to do something different with your business? And then you want to start that final planning, ideally 2 to 3 years before you're ready. Again, we can always speed this up. Your attorneys and financial planners will love you a little bit more if you do this a little bit further out. But just because I say 2 to 3 years doesn't mean that you're too late today to start doing these plans. However, at some point in time, you should get your long-term team together. Ideally, this is an as you go. At worst, you should have these folks in place probably 2 to 3 years before you're ready to transfer, exit. Absolute worst, you need it as you're starting to have these conversations. So your team for any kind of exit planning, other business owners, if you have them, you can't unilaterally decide what's going to happen with your business. You need those in there. Any life partners or family members who are going to be impacted by this. You know, if you say, well, I want to work till I'm 72, but your partner says, oh, well, I wanted us to go traveling starting when we're 65, you need to get on the same plan with that. So they need to be part of these conversations. Similarly, if you say, well, I think we can live on $1,000 a month, and they say, I'm sorry, what? That's a very drastic cutback from where we are right now. Are you expecting me to pick up that slack? You need to have those conversations. Your employees. It's obviously, if you're planning on transferring to your employees need to be in the loop. But honestly, it can be very helpful for your employees to be in the loop, even with other types of transfers, so that they're not surprised, so that there's an openness and honesty as far as what's going on. Obviously, not perfect for every business, but especially if you are considering your employees becoming owners, you need to talk to them. Partner professionals. I use partners in quotation marks because we don't typically like that word as attorneys, but here I think it's appropriate. So for example, if something were to happen to me, or if I need to go on a long and extended vacation, do I have another attorney who can take care of my clients while I'm gone? This is particularly important for people who have client obligations, emergency relationships, but it's useful for all businesses. Do you have somebody who can come over, who understands your industry and can just kind of pick things up if something needs to happen? Your business attorney. always good to get your business attorney on board with this sooner rather than later. I will tell you, I don't do any sort of sales for non-existing clients with less than 90 days notice. It takes about that. And so it's really important to get a business attorney on board soon. Your accountant, because any sort of closure or transfer is going to have tax consequences. So it's important to get them on board soon. Your financial planner, gave a shout out to Karen earlier. What are you doing with that money? Where's that money going? Is it appropriately invested? Do you have enough to live on? Are we kind of flying by the seats of our pants here? So it's important to get that financial planner on board soon. And then trust and estates attorney is going to be an important part of your long-term team for some of these. The trust and estates attorney is mostly important for the emergency stuff. So it's good to know whether you're going to have them on board. But if you are selling your business wholesale, you usually don't need that as much. So get your team together. Then once your team is there, you can sketch your plan. I say sketch because this is loose. This is going to change. This is not set in stone. What's your basic timeline? Do you want to be out by December 31st, 2023? Do you want to be out by the time you hit 67? Do you want to start tapering by the time you hit 67, but not be fully out yet? If so, work backwards from there. How long do you want your employee working with you before they transfer? At what point do you need to get your long-term team on board? Sketch out your general desires. Is this one of those you're going to want to retire so you can travel the world? Is this that you just really like to cut back and get a little bit more work-life balance, really go down to part-time, coming in occasionally? Is this that now I really want to start working on that great American novel? At that point, I need full and 100% break for that reason, but I guess I'm available in case of emergencies. What are your general desires? What are your monetary desires? What do you need to be making from the business after you've left the business? That might impact how involved you want to be. Do you want this to be an internal transfer, a family transfer, a sell to the highest bidder type transfer? Different people have different desires for that based on ease, based on maintenance of culture, based on personal preferences, based on monetary needs. And then the true retirement or the next big adventure kind of goes into that stay involved or be clean or clean break. Then consider the industry considerations. Do you need somebody to be up to date on all of the OSHA regulations that your company is involved in prior to you leaving? Do you need, do you need somebody who is actually licensed to be an owner? So we have some real estate folks in there. Do we need to make sure that they have enough time to actually get their real estate license? Are they licensed? We need to know and understand that. If you're looking at the home improvement business, do we need to make sure that everybody is appropriately licensed as a contractor? Technically, your business should be, but do they understand what's going on? Are they able to uphold the obligations? Any assumptions or base requirements? So what does this mean? Typically, it's just good for you to get out assumptions that you have. For example, like I said earlier, if your assumption is we're going to go travel the world, well, it's good to put that down so that then if you are in fact giving this to your life partner or your family who is part of that team, they go, whoa, I'm not ready to travel the world at that point. Let's talk about this. I think I would want to do that a little bit later, or I don't feel comfortable with the amount of money that you have us saving up for in order to do that assumptions. If the assumption is, oh, well, Joey, the office manager is going to take over. Oh, well, I haven't actually talked to him about that. I need to make sure that that's there. Or that, oh, we sell the business when we're 50, but then your business partner says, no, I wanted to continue till I was 65. The purpose of getting those assumptions out is to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And by writing them down, you actually have the conversations. You actually make sure that they get talked about. Versus people, I swear we had that conversation. I swear they know that. But no, it never quite got around there. And then when do you intend to start the real prep? Okay, if I want out by December 31st, 2023, then I want to make sure that I've talked to everybody who I need to by January 1st, 2023. I want the attorneys and the accountants on board by that February. Just kind of a rough, when should I start looking at this? Honestly, that part is the most likely to change. And that's why I reiterate, this is a sketch. But oftentimes people have a rough idea when they want to do this, and then a circumstance happens that accelerates or that decelerates the process. But the rest of it should roughly stay about the same. And if you're still doing the other things we're talking about, you should be fine. Where did I lose my mouse? So then you prep for your changes in plan. Again, this is going to change. Ideally, how often do you review it? If you're further out, you might say every 3 to 5 years. Once you're getting closer, you might say every 1 to 2 years. If you have to close early, what happens then? Are you willing to risk some things to stop that from happening or changing the plan? Or are you willing to just have your kind of abridged emergency plan in place? What things might cause a change in assumption? And we talked about a couple of those in there. Make sure that these kinds of things are built into your organizational documents so that if something does come up, you have that basic process or ghost plan that you can put in place. You're not completely starting from scratch at that point. You are flexible enough to change because you've already thought about this before and have it in something that is a firm document. And then prep for emergencies. We've done full presentations before on emergency plans and emergency exit plans. Highly recommend it for all of you, especially if you're not transferring imminently, to at least be thinking about this. But what would happen to your company if you got hit by a bus tomorrow? What would happen to your company if that bus put you into a coma for 6 weeks, but did not kill you? So in order to prep for those emergencies, you should always have an emergency plan or file someplace that the people who are part of that emergency plan know how to get it and access it. So here we have your who, what, where, when, and how. Who, make sure that whoever is responsible for taking care of your business in the emergency, whether that's running payroll, finding passwords, notifying your appointments, knows that they are responsible for that. It can be multiple people. You can have somebody personally with the family. It can be somebody internally in the office. Just whoever it is needs to know where to find these things, as well as who do those people talk to in order to make sure those key functions get up and running. So kind of a quick list of who all those references are so that they're not having to dig through your emails in order to try and figure out how to run payroll, and then may not have the password or may not have the appropriate phone in order to do so. True story on that one. What needs to be done to keep the business going? You know, make sure that there's a quick, like, here are the times of the month that each things get done. Here's where you find the important appointments and calendars. Here's where you find the appropriate accounts. If the business needs to be emergency closed because something's happened to you, what needs to be done in those circumstances? Where do you keep all your passwords? Where do you keep your client contacts? Where do you keep the keys? Where do you keep the security codes? When should the emergency plan trigger? If you get hit by a bus, maybe you don't want this to trigger for 48 hours. Let's see what happens. But if after 48 hours, you're still not back and comfortable, that at that point, somebody needs to take care of this. Are there any key deadlines and dates that, like we talked about, when do appointments and payroll happen? And then is there any other information needed to make this happen? Most importantly, a lot of banks do require their own personal form for somebody else to have access in the event that something happens to you. Otherwise, they basically have to show a death certificate, unless they already have access on the bank. So if you have co-owners or if you have an admin with administrative access, that does not apply. But make sure that if there is that additional information, that's in your emergency file, and keep it in a place where you update it regularly. Nice thing about this emergency plan is if you go into a quick transfer, most of this can immediately be applied to the transfer as well. The new owner will also need this. You already have this in place. This is a crucial building block for being able to bob and weave depending on what happens to you and your business. So Always good to have this emergency plan. Like I said, you guys will get this slideshow at the end so that you can kind of follow through this. If you are interested in our previous presentations on this, I believe that we have them in our on-demand library. We can absolutely send some links on that one. So before we go into the kind of as you go stuff, those are the big planning things. Any questions so far? All right. Awesome. Basically, I've lulled everyone to sleep or into a panic, one of the two. Keep asking questions if you get to them. Hopefully it's just everyone's like, I know this, I've already done this, we're good. So then what do you do as you go? So as a preface to this, why do I say what you need to do as you go? Because when you're going to transfer your business, there is a process called the due diligence process, where the person who is purchasing your business wants to know how healthy the business is, how profitable is it, what's your cash flow look like, what can I expect the cash flow to be, how much are you spending on payroll, how much are you spending on benefits and expenses, have you had any lawsuits in the last couple of years? Have you been keeping up to date with your organizational formalities so that you're protected from liability? The answers to these questions will determine things like what kind of purchase or sale is appropriate, how valuable is your company, how much is it worth, whether they want to do this in the first place, how likely it is that this company will continue being profitable without you as the owner at the head of it. So all of these are key questions. If you have to put all of these documents together for the due diligence process, at worst, you're going to take a hit in value because they're not contemporaneous documents. Sorry, at best, you're going to take a hit in value because they're not contemporaneous documents. At worst, you may lose the sale completely or up to half the value of your company. Also, at best, it's just a pain in the butt to do all at once. I don't know if anybody has ever tried to do 3 years worth of accounting simultaneously. For some clients who have tried that, I can verify to you that it is not fun and less effective. So what we're talking about here is saying that we know what you're going to have to do once you sell. Here are ways to make that process less painful as you go. So key thing here is keep your organization in shape and flexible, ready to adjust to what goes on, as well as a up to date. I've helped with the transfer of some companies that hadn't updated their organizational documents in 20 years. They no longer reflected how the company was doing business, and they had some pretty onerous procedures that we had to follow in order to appropriately transfer the company. Wouldn't have been necessary if we had been working with that company from the beginning and regularly updated and reviewed that, which would have made the company a little bit more flexible to go on with that sale. First and foremost, file your taxes, preferably on time. Sometimes delays are necessary. It does happen, but lack of taxes will significantly impede the ability of your business to transfer, may result in carryover liability to you once you leave it if you just flat out close it. Means that there's a lot of big question marks as far as liability, as well as it's hard to track the accuracy of what's been going on with it. So easiest thing to make sure that you're good to sell is to keep your taxes filed and either on time or with appropriate limited sorts of delays and extensions. Maintain your operating agreement or bylaws. So all limited liability companies should have operating agreements. All corporations should have bylaws. This is something that is in the law, but that only becomes relevant when you get sued, when you're looking for a loan, or when you're going to sell your company. However, if you do it only at that time, it wasn't that useful. But your operating agreement or bylaws should have the rules around transfer, as well as how your company operates generally. And in theory, you should have been following that. Same with annual meetings. Annual meetings are technically required for corporations, highly recommended for limited liability companies, and are a consideration in a piercing the corporate veil scenario. If you have no annual meetings, then you don't have proof that your company would survive a piercing the corporate veil action. That's a concern for somebody who's coming in and would be pierced. Their house might be on the line for something you failed to do for several years. So that's never good. As well as holding the annual meetings does help with that flexibility. At that point, you're reviewing those operating agreements and bylaws and say, oh man, this says that we can only sell the company if it hits a certain value. Well, we don't want that in there. Let's amend. You're catching those things earlier. You're adjusting based on circumstances in your life and your business. Maintaining up-to-date member agreements. They would be called member agreements in an LLC, shareholder agreements, subscription agreements, similar things in a corporation. These are not required. Member agreements and shareholder agreements are not required. They're typically what you have if different members have different rules than the general rules in the operating agreements or bylaws. But if you do want those to be different, you want to make sure that you're keeping those up to date. Systemize, delegate, and departmentalize. This is basically keeping your organization in a way where it can be transferred easily so that the entire value is not up to you. If everything is in your head, that's not valuable because somebody can't come in and do exactly what you said you were going to do. And if you're saying, oh, well, you know, in like the couple of weeks before we actually sell it, I'll just tell them everything I do. No, you won't. You're going to forget a bunch of it. It's not going to be perfectly the way that you're doing it. You want to start systematizing. There's a lot of different ways to do that. You can record yourself going around your company as what you do every day. You can keep standard operating procedures. You can keep policies. Similarly, start to delegate things so that other people are doing them and you can work together to create those systems. And again, so it doesn't all lie on you. If you do get hit by that bus, the more that you've delegated, the less that your emergency plan has to cover. And departmentalizing is something that doesn't have to happen. But if you are considering selling part of your company and not all of it, it's good to understand what that value is. So for example, if I have a legal practice and we have business law, and then my partner does family law, and then we also have some presentations and publications, it's good to know, okay, what's the value of our business law practice versus our family law practice? Do we have systems for each of those individual things? What about our publication? So understanding the different departments in your company. Different companies will have this, other ones won't. Maintaining that emergency plan, like I said, will keep that in shape and flexible, as well as be a good preparation. Maintaining sufficient savings so that if there is an emergency plan, or if you are not getting the result that you want from your transfer plan, that you have enough that a small setback doesn't mean you have to close your doors immediately. Make sure you pay yourself. Number one reason that I see of businesses closing prior to their planned time is that they're just not making enough money from it. And sometimes it's just that the owner isn't making enough money from it. As well as somebody doesn't want to come in and buy your business if you're not making an income from your business. If this is a really expensive hobby, where you're basically just making money in order to pay the expenses, that's not attractive. That's not attractive for an employee who's in it. That's not attractive for an outside investor. Make sure you pay yourself. Start as early as possible. It may not be where you want it to be at the end, but that is valuable. And maintain insurance. That way there is coverage if something goes wrong. Once you get to the point where you are selling, you can get what's called tail insurance, which covers claims that would have occurred prior to when you sold it, but aren't brought until afterwards. But insurance can cover a lot of sins and make sure that you're not paying for them. So those are kind of the as you go things that you can do to make sure your business is healthy and ready. And then the day arrives when you are ready to actually move and sell it. So all of these ones that we're talking about here are going to assume immediate transfer. We're not going to talk about fading. We're not going to talk about liquidating today. We're kind of assuming that you guys are wanting to do, and a lot of you, it sounds like, are internal or external transfers of some sort. We're also going to mention the emergency plans here. But these all also assume that the immediate transfer, that the owner stops work on or shortly after the closing. Like we had mentioned, there are other types of transfers, like where you can stay as an employee of the new company for 3 to 4 years or whatever that happens to be, where you retain some ownership and you minimize how much equity or interest you have over time. For the sake of explanation, we're going to assume immediate transfer for all of these. Also, before I go into the for all of these here, I want to explain a term that is going to come up in these. And that is an asset purchase or a stock purchase. So there are two types of transfers of your business. The first is if you are truly taking your interest, your units, your shares, the actual thing that gives you ownership, and transferring that to someone else. Under both the LLC Act and the Corporations Act, businesses are detached from their owners. So if you give somebody the thing that proves your ownership, the business continues and only the owner is changed. Everything else of the business remains the same. The EIN, the bank accounts, the clients, the contracts, the liabilities, the privileges, the internet account, the phone numbers, literally everything goes along with it. The only thing that's changed is who is making that decision and getting the profit. I will put a little asterisk in there that if you're an LLC taxed as a sole proprietor or partnership, you can't actually do that without it breaking the EIN. You can still do it. It will break the EIN for tax purposes. If you're an LLC taxed as an S corporation, you can absolutely do a stock transfer without causing any issues with the taxes. The more popular version is called an asset transfer or an asset sale. That is where one company sells all of the assets to another company, but they're two separate companies. So that would be if I sold my book of business to another law firm, but they don't get the name. Well, they could. I could even sell them the trade name Polaris Law Group. I could sell them the rights to the name Polaris. I could sell them my employment contracts or the rights to those employment contracts. You can't sell employees, you sell the contracts. Any of the assets we want. And we can limit those or not. What doesn't come along with that? The EIN, the history of the company. It is a completely new company. That means that none of the attached liabilities go along with that unless you're affirmatively transferring them. The reason it's popular is that it's a complete separation. You get the benefits with fewer liabilities. That can also affect the price. It's also nice if you are doing a pick and choose sort of thing. So I'm bringing that up at the beginning because that will come up in some of the decision-making processes. But I wanted to make sure that I distinguish between those two things. Mostly I'm going to use them interchangeably, but I will state when only one or the other matters. So for any type of transfer, ideally 2 years before you're actually doing the transfer or the sale, you want to get that corporate book in order. Make sure those operating agreements, bylaws, meeting minutes are ready to go. Make sure that you're updating any, we had this meeting, but we forgot to do the minutes. Can I do any recording of them? Talk to your attorney, see what's going on with that. Get it all up to date. If you're doing this 3 months before the sale, you're going to have a problem. But if you're doing it 2 years before, you're just doing some housekeeping. Get your past years of finances in order. If you haven't been reconciling, now's the time to do that. If you have those past owed taxes, now's the time to do that. Make sure that you understand what those documents mean. Take them to your accountant, ask for an explanation. Get your long-term team ready if you haven't already. So any portions of that you haven't talked to, now's that time to go talk to the financial planner for your personal understanding of what you're going to need after this. Now's that time to know, do I need that specialized accountant on board? Make sure your accountant's ready for this. Review your internal systems. We talked about making sure you can systemize. Are those all in place? A good way to practice this is have somebody in your business who doesn't do that job. Try to do that job for a day. See how easy it is for them to pick it up. Is the information there and try to do it without you walking around with them. Just see all right, here's where the SOP is. Here's where the video is. I want you to try and do this task. Come back and report to me how easy or how hard this is, what's missing, what's not. Give it a rating. That way, can someone just come in and pick it up? Spread out any knowledge that is unique to you. Make sure that you've gone through your daily checklist. Maybe record what your average day or week looks like to make sure that you're not missing anything. Now it's time to finalize that transitional plan. Make sure all those assumptions are still met, that all the team is on board with them. Have the other members of your long-term team review that transition plan. Figure out some rough deadlines. Now is a great time to put in that I want to be done by this date, and so I want to talk to the attorney by this date. I want to have listed this for sale by this date. Determine how you want to transfer. Are we going to offer it to the employees first? And if we don't like what we hear, if they don't like it, then we're going to go list it on the market. Are we going to try list it on the market first? Are we going to pull it back if we don't get up to this point? So any of those hard lines of I am not selling if I'm getting less than X for it. Figure out what those are. Think about what you want to keep from your business. So, if I want to make sure that I keep my programs and presentations, because I'm not going to practice law anymore, but I'd love to go around as a speaker, I need to make sure that that asset is not transferred. Or if it is, that I still have some rights to it. And then release any liens or securities that you have. So for example, if you have a truck that still has a security on it because you haven't fully paid it off, you're going to have to disclose that. You may not be able to sell the truck until that's paid off. Make sure that you review the terms of that lien, understand what they are, prepare for it, or sell that off at that time. So then we have each of these are those timelines that I said I'm not going to go specifically through, and we went through a lot of them on this front. But the 12 to 18 months ahead, I have some things that you should be doing, particularly for who you need to be talking to. This one's for that internal transfer. So assuming that you're talking to an employee or an existing member of the company. We talked about due diligence and what that involves. Due diligence is not going to be as involved for somebody who is an active participant in your company. So if I am selling my shares, my interest to my partner should already know everything about the company. Due diligence is going to be like that. Now, they may say, oh, we need to get this cleaned up as part of our due diligence period. Yes, that's a good plan if you haven't already done that in the previous period, but due diligence is very quick typically for these internal transfers. You'll notice the finalized financial details is both here and in quotation marks, because oftentimes you can't get a good offer of financial details until you've done the due diligence. So you can't actually know what the company is worth. When you're putting it out ahead of time, you may have an idea as far as what you want the company to be worth. Whoops. And you may say, I'm looking for $1.5 million. But after you do the due diligence, you run it by both of your accountants, your financial advisors, you might say, oh, it's actually only worth $1.2 million. Or better, it's actually worth $2.3 million. I'm going to adjust that up. It is usually harder to adjust up than to adjust down after the due diligence period for what it is worth. Just be aware of that. And that's also when you determine, do you want the asset or the stock purchase? Now, if I'm doing an internal transfer to my existing partner, it's probably going to be a stock purchase. Why would we start something over that she's already part of? But if it's an employee, they might want to start their own company, start fresh just with all of the assets. And then you'll see we want to start transitioning those legal documents, assigning them over, talking with those contract holders. Hey, landlord, I'm going to sell this to my employee. Is that going to be a problem? What paperwork do I need to do for you in order to make this happen? Start those conversations early, get those purchase agreements in and set the closing dates. So a purchase agreement is the thing that says all of the terms as far as what's going to happen with the contract. Closing is the date that it all happens. Purchase agreement, contract to buy, closing is the date that the actual transfer happens. So if any of you guys have bought houses before, similar process. You have the contract and then you have the closing. And then you'll start talking to those other people who don't have contracts earlier in time. And then the transitioning owner should start to step back ahead of time. Why at 3 months with an internal transfer? To catch any of those issues you didn't catch before. And you'll notice that's going to be different with your internal or external, how much you step back and when. Here, this is mostly a test run. Can you do it? What gets missed when you do it? Versus at some of the later ones, it might not be until the closing itself. And so at the closing, you do the payment or the promissory note, give back anything the owner's keeping. That would be when I get my assignment for my IP. And then you usually have a transitional period where you give some assistance and make sure payments go smoothly. This is very similar for the non-internal family transfer, almost identical. And then it's it's somewhat similar for a simple sale. So simple sale, closely held sale, that under $100,000, very, very similar. The key difference here is you have to determine if you're going to try and sell it yourself or if you're going to get a broker. If you're doing it yourself, you want to make sure you get what's called a non-disclosure agreement in place so that you can share information with the potential buyer without them being able to use it against you in their own business, especially if you're getting a industry competitor to buy, or to tell it to other people to possibly harm the ability of you to sell it for the price that you want. This is very common when somebody is looking at an industry competitor. Customers are actually a very common one to buy businesses as kind of a simple. We want this. We don't want to lose it in the neighborhood. Let's keep it. I would love to do this. You're still reaching out to someone. If you don't know where to look for these folks, this is a great place to talk to some of our SBDC consultants. And then if you really just don't want the time of shopping around on this, you might get a broker. Typically, we don't see brokers for sales under $100,000. They end up taking a little bit too much of the percentage, but it's not unheard of. And there are some brokers that specialize specifically with this. You'll also notice that with these external ones, that evaluation is an option, but you can kind of do a rough and ready one. I do recommend evaluation for a full sale. You'll notice the full sale breaks this down more. We do highly recommend a broker for large sales. You might also want to put more of the employment and insurance information in for a full sale. Somebody isn't going to be getting all of that kind of last minute. You'll also notice a lot of those deadlines are moved out. So we had 6 to 9 months for due diligence for those close ones. Here we're recommending 9 to 12 months. It's just going to take longer to do these because they don't know what they're coming into. And you'll notice that there's far more negotiations in here and that we're going to take a little bit more time for those legal documents. So I know this was and then really quickly, the emergency transfer, we do according to that emergency plan. Do know whether you want to do a close or a transfer. This is a good time to talk to that trust and estates attorney. If you are going to close it upon your death or incapacity, give the person who is closing it the information access they would need to do it. That might be your attorney, your spouse. If you're going to transfer it to someone, make sure the emergency plan has the details they need to run the business. Defaults, if you do not have this in your operating agreement, if you are a sole owner, well, if you're an owner and you die, your interest in that company default go to your spouse if you're married. If you have no spouse, they go to your kids in equal shares. If you have no kids, they go to your parents in equal shares. If your parents are not surviving, they go to your siblings in equal shares. And then beyond that, I forget. I think it's aunts and uncles, but that would be when you want to talk to that trust and estates attorney. If anything I just said made you go, oh no, then you need to have something different in your will and or your organizational documents, or you need to have the default that the company closes if something happens to you. Then all of the proceeds from that will go to that person, but they won't actually get the interest in the company. So make sure that you are aware of that one. Key takeaways. There are multiple realistic options for this. The more you have planned in advance, though, the easier time that you'll have. A lot of communication with a lot of people. That is what makes these easy, and that is what makes these go through where everybody is happy at the end, but also be flexible. Exiting is made to be flexible. There's a lot of different choices out there. Pick the choice that is right for you and the other people involved, and you will have a good time with that one. Thank you guys so much. I will get the slides out afterwards. I saw somebody was asking about, I didn't have some of the definitions on the slide. I will update the slideshow to make sure that we have that definition of asset and stock sale in there, so that we can have that for everyone. I also see that David, the information about the how to keep your company on track as you go is the main information for what will happen in due diligence. I will add in that asset versus stock sale slide for you though. Not a problem. And then how much do brokers charge? Julie gave some good community feedback as far as that one, of they charge 10% or a minimum of 20,000. That's not unusual. And those will vary, but it is usually a percentage of the sale with a base level just to make sure that they get past it. And that's why sometimes under those smaller ones, people decide to forego the broker, is because the cash benefit value isn't sufficient on that one. Whereas with the larger sales, it can be really, really beneficial. Any other questions? Thank you so much, Alan. I appreciate that.
Samantha, if I can add two things from a financial perspective. Obviously, this is the transfer, the exiting definitely has the legal component, but some financial planners will actually look at the business numbers to include a valuation. So when you get to that point, would you sell it for 2.8, or is it really only worth 2.1? And so that resource in utilizing a financial planner sometimes can be moved up in the overall process, because you want to make sure when you're looking at your numbers, it makes sense all around before you even start marketing it or anything else. So,
and don't bet, Karen, that they'll tell you at that point too, if you don't have sufficient financial documents to make that valuation, won't they?
They sure will. And depending on the size of the company, the IRS does require a formal valuation, especially if you're doing some planning within the estate aspect. But if it's just for you as a business owner trying to get a feel of what it is, what the best price will be, sometimes bumping that up in your stage of planning will really help you as you make other decisions.
Absolutely. And I did also want to share that part of the reason I didn't go much into the finances on this one, I believe we have another exit planning webinar on the on-demand site for North Metro SBDC that is more from the financial side, and they do a great job. Like I said, also highly recommend doing a consultation with Karen Patel. And then also Wesley had the question of how do you list your business for sale if you're selling it yourself, what sites? I don't actually know the answer to that one, Wesley, but that is also one where I would highly recommend prior to sale, talking with our SBDC consultants who specialize in transferring or selling your business, and they'll have more of that information. In my experience, the clients who have listed it themselves have more talked to others in the industry who they know, or key customer client demographics. So I'm not perfectly familiar with that, but I know we'll have some SBDC consultants who would be able to answer that for you. So highly recommend everybody to talk to those, talk to Karen or a similar financial professional, but talk to Karen. And as well as, you know, this is a lot. These were the highlights today. I appreciate everybody coming on with us. But I highly recommend everyone to talk to their personal accountant and attorney prior to jumping into this, so you can get that more personalized, nuanced information. Back to you, Angela.
Thank you, Samantha. This is awesome. So a recording will be uploaded to our video library this afternoon. We will be sending out slides. Is that right, Sam? We've got
I
your
will.
slide
Yep.
deck that we'll send out to all of you. I put northmetrosbdc.com in the chat for you to take a look at all of our consultants. Yes, look at Karen, look up Sam, and also we have other consultants that help on the business sales sides of things. So we're here to help. And we just want to thank all of you for showing up, and reach out to us if you have any questions or need some support in this transition. So thank you. You all have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.